Everyone saw it. The headline was everywhere. CEO fired after racist remarks go viral. Underneath, a photo of her, Eleanor Mason, founder of a wellness tech company that had once been praised for its diversity and ethics. Now she was labeled a hypocrite, a liar, a monster. No one asked her side of the story. One moment, she had been standing in her office, speaking with an HR intern. The next, a 17-second video, cropped and captioned, exploded across social media. It showed her saying the words, "You people are always late." What the video didn't show was the part before, when she'd been talking about delivery services. What it also didn't show was the intern smirking as she hit record after deliberately baiting Eleanor. Within hours, the board called an emergency meeting. She was asked to resign, then told to leave. By the next morning, angry crowds had gathered outside her house. She watched through the blinds as someone threw red paint on her garage door. "Murder of dreams," it read. Her inbox was flooded. Some messages were cold. "You deserve to lose everything." Others were violent. "Hope someone teaches you a lesson." She called her lawyer, but he had already dropped her. Days blurred. Investors pulled out. A class action lawsuit emerged. Her reputation shredded. Her name now a warning. Even her closest friends stopped replying to her texts. The woman who had mentored dozens of young women in business, who had funded scholarships and personally led outreach programs in underprivileged neighborhoods, suddenly erased. The final blow came 3 weeks later, when her house was repossessed. She had drained her savings trying to stay afloat. Now, she stood on the sidewalk with 2 bags and no destination. She ended up at a women's shelter under a fake name. She scrubbed dishes in exchange for a bed. No one recognized her. No one believed her when she tried to explain who she used to be. So she stopped trying. For months, she remained invisible. Just another shadow among the discarded. Until one evening, when a black SUV pulled up outside the shelter, a tall, broad-shouldered man stepped out, walking with a distinct limp. He wore a tailored suit, and behind him stood 2 assistants. He walked slowly toward the door, then asked the receptionist, "I'm looking for a woman named Eleanor Mason." The receptionist frowned. "We don't give out information like that, sir." The man smiled. "Tell her it's someone she once saved. At the mall. 10 years ago. She gave me her lunch and paid for a motel when I had nothing." The receptionist turned pale, then slowly nodded. In the back of the building, Eleanor was cleaning floors when she heard her name. A man with 1 leg had come to find her, and her life was about to change. Again. 10 years earlier, Eleanor Mason had been a different woman. Not in appearance, her sharp suits and tired eyes were already there, but in spirit, she was still full of purpose back then. Though the cracks were beginning to show, leading a growing startup in the health tech world, attending endless meetings, dodging burnout with too much coffee and too little sleep, it was all catching up with her. That afternoon, she had carved out 30 minutes for herself. A quick walk through the mall, just to breathe, think, maybe buy a new pair of flats. She didn't expect to witness anything unusual. She didn't expect to be pulled into someone else's nightmare. But then she heard shouting. Near the central food court, a commotion had gathered. A man was on the floor, not drunk, not yelling, just sitting, calm, silent, a black man in his mid-30s, wearing a worn hoodie and a baseball cap. His pant leg on one side was pinned up, revealing that he had only 1 leg. A pair of crutches lay beside him. 2 mall security guards towered over him, voices raised. "You can't sit here. Customers are complaining. This is private property." The man tried to explain, his voice calm. "I'm just resting. My stump's aching. I'm not asking for anything." Eleanor froze mid-step. She could feel eyes turning away from the scene, people pretending not to notice. A mother dragged her child past, A group of teens giggled and took a video. The guards didn't care. One reached down, grabbing the man's sleeve. "Get up or we'll make you get up." That was it. Eleanor stepped forward before she even realized what she was doing. "Excuse me," she said, walking straight into the space between them. "Is this how you treat veterans?" The guards blinked. One muttered, "Lady, please don't get involved," but Eleanor didn't back down. "He's not doing anything wrong. He's not panhandling. He's sitting. You're harassing a disabled man." The man on the ground looked up at her, stunned. "I'll call management," she said firmly, "and I'll film this interaction if I have to." "Is that what you want?" The guards hesitated. Then one of them scoffed and turned away. The other gave the man a glare and followed. Once they were gone, Eleanor crouched beside him. "You okay?" He nodded slowly. "Yeah, happens all the time. People don't like the way I look." She sat on the bench next to him. "You hungry?" He didn't answer right away, just gave her a side glance, then nodded. Yeah, I am." "Come on," she said. "Let's get something decent." They ended up at a small diner near the mall. He ordered pancakes and eggs, and ate like he hadn't seen real food in days. Eleanor let him finish before asking anything. "What's your name?" "What's your name?" "Micah," he said quietly. "Micah Rollins. You a vet?" "Yeah, lost my leg in Kandahar. Didn't get much help after. Tried to get back on my feet, no pun intended. Fell through the cracks." She nodded slowly. The kind of nod only someone who's seen too much red tape could give. "Listen," she said, placing a hotel key card on the table. "I booked you 3 nights at a place nearby. They won't ask questions. There's some cash in the envelope too." He looked at it, stunned. "Why are you doing this?" She smiled, just a little, "Because someone once helped me when I didn't deserve it. And because this world is already cold enough." Micah's eyes filled with something unspoken. "How can I pay you back?" Eleanor stood up, grabbing her coat. "Don't, just take care of yourself. And if one day you become somebody, help someone else." Then she left, without waiting for a thank you. She never saw him again, until 10 years later, when he would walk back into her life, and give it all back. For years after that day at the mall, Eleanor Mason never thought about Micah Rollins again. Not because she didn't care, but because life moved too fast. Her company, Vital Nest, exploded in popularity. What began as a small wellness tech firm turned into a national name. Investors poured in. Magazines featured her as a pioneer. She spoke at conferences, appeared on morning shows, and even sat on diversity panels. People called her a visionary. She worked endlessly, slept little, lived off ambition and anxiety, but it paid off. She built something that mattered. Or so she thought. The fall began with a single post. A junior employee named Tasha, someone Eleanor barely remembered hiring, uploaded a shaky video to her personal feed. The caption read, "My CEO just told me black women like me don't belong in leadership. Here's the proof." The video showed Eleanor in a staff meeting, speaking to a group of interns. The words she said, "You people always seem to struggle with deadlines." It spread like wildfire. No one cared that she was referring to third-party contractors who had botched a product launch. No one cared that the video was cut mid-sentence, and the context was gone. The comments section became a war zone. "She's done." "Typical Karen behavior." "Burn the company to the ground." "Boycott Vital Nest." Within 24 hours, major influencers picked it up. Celebrities tweeted. News anchors speculated. A well-known activist called for her resignation. Protesters gathered outside her office. Eleanor tried to explain. She released a statement. She cried in a live video, but the internet had made up its mind. The board called her in. "It's about optics, Eleanor. Even if you didn't mean it that way, people heard it that way." She was forced out of her own company. Vital Nest issued a press release about their new direction and commitment to anti-racism. The same people she had mentored now deleted her from the narrative entirely. Her inbox, once full of admiration, became venom. "Hope you rot. We're watching you. Racist witch." Even her so-called friends stopped answering. Calls went to voicemail. Emails bounced. The silence screamed louder than the hate. Sponsors pulled out of her speaking gigs. The IRS audited her out of nowhere. Banks froze her assets after a cyber attack triggered red flags. Lawyers dropped her to protect their firm's reputation. She tried to sue for defamation. No one would take the case. Her house, once her sanctuary, was vandalized twice. The second time, someone spray-painted a slur across her front door. Police told her to stay elsewhere for safety. She packed 2 suitcases and left. No one asked where she went. She spent the next months drifting, first at a roadside motel, then a friend's guest room, then nowhere. Her savings disappeared, paying off debts that weren't even hers. Someone had hacked her accounts and redirected funds, and no one seemed to care. Eventually, Eleanor ended up at a women's shelter under the name Lisa. She scrubbed dishes, cleaned toilets, and stayed invisible. The woman who once stood in front of TED audiences now folded, donated laundry, and wept at night behind a cracked bathroom mirror. She never spoke of the incident again. She never thought about the mall, or the man with one leg. That chapter was closed, sealed, buried. Until one day, the receptionist called out her name, her real name. "Someone is here to see you," she said. "A man. He said you saved his life." And just like that, the past caught up. But this time, it wasn't to destroy her. It was to bring her back to life. The shelter smelled like bleach and burnt toast. That morning, Eleanor sat on the edge of her cot, lacing up a pair of secondhand sneakers with torn soles. Her fingers were stiff from cold. The radiator had gone out again overnight, and the staff kept saying they'd fix it next week. She had no plans for the day. Maybe she'd volunteer in the kitchen. Maybe not. It didn't really matter anymore. Each morning bled into the next, a quiet shuffle toward nothing. Then came the voice. "Excuse me, Eleanor Mason?" She looked up slowly. No one called her that anymore. Not since everything fell apart. A man stood in the doorway, knees shaven, wearing a tailored coat and polished shoes. He leaned slightly on a sleek black cane, a military-style watch visible under his cuff. Behind him stood 2 suited men, security by the look of them. She blinked, confused. Her first thought was that someone had found her. Another journalist, maybe, or a cruel prank. But then she saw his eyes, kind, steady, familiar. It took a moment, but the memory snapped into place. "Micah?" He smiled. "Took you long enough, Miss Mason." She stood, heart pounding. He was different now. Broader, stronger, sure of himself. But the voice, the quiet warmth in his tone, was unmistakable. "What? What are you doing here?" "I came to find you. I've been looking for months." "Why?" "Because 10 years ago, you saved my life." Eleanor stared at him in disbelief. Micah walked closer, a slight limp in his gait. The 2 men behind him stepped aside as if understanding this was personal. "Do you remember what you said to me that day?" he asked. "In the cab, after you bought me lunch." She nodded slowly, voice barely above a whisper. "I told you to take care of yourself. And if you ever became someone, to pass it on." He grinned. "Well, I did. I became someone." Micah told her everything. After she paid for his hotel stay, he used the last of the cash she'd slipped him to buy a phone and call an old army buddy. The buddy got him into a free veterans program that led to rehab, then therapy, then school. He studied nonprofit administration, applied for grants, started working with displaced vets. Within 5 years, Micah had launched Forward Base, an organization that built and funded veteran shelters across the country. He partnered with hospitals, churches, even Fortune 500 companies. He'd spoken before Congress, consulted on housing policy. Recently, he'd been appointed senior advisor to Senator Caraway on issues related to homelessness and military re-entry. He was, as one magazine put it, the man who gave the forgotten a future, and he never forgot her. Every project I built, every bed we opened for a vet, I always thought about you, he said. The woman who stood up when no one else did. I've been waiting for a chance to repay that. Tears welled in her eyes. I don't need anything, she said softly. I'm just glad you're doing well. Micah shook his head. That's not enough. He reached into his coat and pulled out a file. He handed it to her. Inside was a formal offer, full-time position. Executive director. At his foundation's newest shelter. A sprawling facility in Virginia focused on women veterans and trauma recovery. With it came a salary, housing, benefits, and a private therapist. You're not just someone who helped me, Eleanor, he said. You're someone this world still needs. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Micah smiled. You told me to help someone else when I made it. So I am. You're my someone else. The room felt warmer somehow. For the first time in years, Eleanor breathed fully, not in fear, not in shame, but in hope. The new apartment was modest but clean. 2 bedrooms, a small balcony overlooking a park, and most importantly, a door she could lock from the inside. Eleanor hadn't had that kind of safety in years. Micah insisted she take it. Rent was covered for the year. No negotiation. But it wasn't just about shelter. He gave her purpose again. At the Foundation's Virginia branch, she worked closely with women who had suffered trauma, displacement, and injustice. Women who, like her, had been silenced by systems they once trusted. Eleanor's empathy wasn't theoretical. It came from the trenches of humiliation and survival. That made her different. That made her needed. Still, something haunted her. A truth that refused to be buried. The incident that destroyed her, the viral moment, hadn't just happened. It had always felt manufactured. Back then, a junior employee named Tasha had posted a shaky video online, accusing Eleanor of making a racially insensitive comment during a team meeting. The video showed no actual evidence, just Tasha's tearful testimony. But it spread like wildfire. Eleanor had been advised not to fight it. PR firms told her denial would look like deflection. Apologies, even if undeserved, were her only shot at recovery. She refused. And for that she was crucified. Now sitting across from Micah at a cafe one afternoon, she told him everything. He listened carefully, then leaned back and said, "Let me look into it." 2 days later, his tech team ran digital forensics on the original post. Within hours, they found anomalies. Metadata had been altered. IP logs traced back to a private network. One linked not to Tasha, but to a corporate rival. Eleanor had outbid 2 months before the scandal broke. Micah didn't stop there. He connected with an independent journalist, a Pulitzer-nominated investigator named Roberta Lang, who owed Micah a favor. She dug deep. Over the next 2 weeks, she uncovered emails, payment trails, and non-disclosure agreements. The truth was sickening. Eleanor's fall wasn't the result of outrage. It was the result of strategy. Executives at Garrison and Bloom, a competing firm, had quietly hired Tasha months earlier. Her role had been to infiltrate, destabilize, and destroy. They used her background as a social shield. If Eleanor pushed back, it could be spun as racism. If she didn't, she'd fall silently. And she did. Until now. Micah's foundation published the findings in a detailed, transparent report. No drama, No spin. Just facts. The media that once shredded Eleanor now hesitated, recalculated, and finally apologized. Some publicly, others quietly removed old headlines. The woman they'd branded a monster was in fact the victim of a corporate takedown. Micah didn't gloat. He didn't throw it in anyone's face. He simply sent Eleanor a message the day the story broke. Justice moves slow, but it moves. That evening, she stood in the new shelter's garden, watching volunteers set up a small dinner for residents. One of the women handed her a flower, a white lily, and said softly, "You saved my life this week." Eleanor smiled. "No," she said, "I'm just passing it on." It started with a blurry video, uploaded by an anonymous user on a Monday evening. The footage was old, over 10 years, based on the date stamp, and shaky. Shot on a phone that belonged to a teenager at the time, it captured a chaotic moment inside a mall food court, security guards surrounding a thin, one-legged black man in a torn army jacket, one of them pushing him, another grabbing his arm. Then, a woman in heels and a navy blazer stepped in. She was furious. Unafraid, she raised her voice, demanding they stop. She pointed at the mall's code of conduct on the wall. She got in the way, physically standing between the guards and the man. She helped him up. And when the guards tried to justify themselves, she didn't just argue, she shamed them. Loud enough for everyone to hear, that woman was Eleanor West. Someone had captured it all. The post didn't mention her name at first, but it didn't take long for the internet to recognize her face. The woman, once called a racist by the media, had risked her own safety to protect a disabled veteran a decade ago. The comments exploded. "Wait, is that the same Eleanor West? So all that stuff from before was a lie. She saved him, literally saved him." Within hours, hashtags trended. Eleanor was right. Whole story. Journalists who had once torn her apart reached out for interviews. Talk shows wanted exclusives. Brands who'd once pulled away offered apologies wrapped in PR. Eleanor didn't answer any of them. Instead, she sat quietly in the staff room of one of Micah's shelters, sipping tea, surrounded by the very people she had spent the last year helping. Micah entered the room holding a tablet. "You've seen it?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "It's strange," she said. "That moment, I never even thought it mattered. I just did what anyone should have done." Micah smiled. "It mattered to me." He set the tablet down. There were thousands of comments pouring in, some crying, some apologizing, some sharing how that video changed how they saw everything. And yet, Eleanor didn't look triumphant. She looked calm. "Are you going back?" he asked. "Business, the board, your old life." She shook her head. "That woman in the video, I like her more than the one who built that company. I think I'll stay." Micah didn't press further. He understood. Over the following weeks, Eleanor became a public face, not of scandal, but of resilience. She gave only one interview. It wasn't with a major network. It was a podcast hosted by a young black student who'd been homeless just 2 years earlier. She spoke about silence, power, and kindness that doesn't require cameras. She never once mentioned her accusers. When people asked her why she didn't sue, didn't retaliate, didn't demand retribution, she answered simply, "Because revenge doesn't build shelters." Instead, she and Micah co-founded a new program. It offered transitional housing for women falsely accused or publicly shamed. It was called the Lily House, named after the flower she'd once been given by a resident in the garden. In time, people forgot the scandal, but they didn't forget the video. The woman who stood between a disabled man and 2 guards had become something more than a headline. She had become proof that sometimes the truth just takes longer to find its voice. On a quiet evening, Eleanor and Micah sat on a wooden bench just outside the Lily House. The garden was in bloom. Soft lavender, white lilies, and sunflowers stretching toward the last light of day. Children laughed in the distance. Someone was playing guitar near the kitchen, and the smell of fresh bread floated through the air. Micah glanced at Eleanor, who looked peaceful for the first time in years, not polished, not guarded, just present. He turned slightly toward her. "You gave me a second chance back then. No questions asked. No expectations." Eleanor smiled faintly, eyes still on the horizon. "I didn't think it was a big deal." "It was to me," he said quietly. "You didn't just save me from a bad day. You interrupted my freefall. You reminded me I still had value. And now, I've just tried to do the same for you." She looked at him then, her eyes a little glassy. "I don't know if I deserved it." "Everyone deserves one second chance," he replied. "Some people just need someone brave enough to give it to them." They sat in silence after that, letting the evening wrap around them like a soft blanket. Later, a camera zoomed out slowly from that same garden. The bench, the flowers, the people moving quietly in the background, all still, all real. And as the screen began to fade to black, Eleanor's voice echoed over the final image, steady and calm. "Sometimes, the smallest kindness plants a seed that will one day grow into your salvation." Then silence. "Fade out."